very stimulating and rich for discussion. And we're going to turn to our board and give the board the opportunity to raise any questions with members of the panel here that are pressing for you. And I know we all have a bunch. Yes, Waded.
One common theme that I hear from all the presenters is what Sylvie has called this lack of infrastructure for data stewardship and analysis, or the lack of connectivity, as Julie mentioned. I'm thinking, well, in some countries the problem will be with policies. In other countries it will be with lack of technology, as Dale was mentioning. If we all could have these iPods that we can carry around, or in some instances, what we have seen is sheer lack of or loss of memory, if you will, as new constituencies, as new genders come to farming. They don't know about things that have already been tried and true, and they reinvent the wheel, and there we go again, and we create these horrible mistakes. If you could give BIFAD some advice, what are some of the policies, what are some of the recommendations that we can munch on and work on in order to elevate them to individuals who can make a difference?
One of the really difficult issues confronting developed countries is the lack of regulations on marketing pesticides. And those of us who spent a lot of time in developing countries working with aid and with other organizations recognize that this is perhaps an insurmountable problem. The rice IPM example, as long as the funding was there, FAO people were on the ground floor, training was going on, there wasn't a problem. So the onus responsibility becomes the government's. And with this limited infrastructure and the opposing marketing forces, it's difficult. I think FAO is working in Southeast Asia with Erie to look at regulations of pesticides so the farmers don't end up with adulterated, low quality materials. But this is an issue that I don't think anybody has got can answer at this point in time, but it is a major problem.
Julie?
Dr. Cruzado, these are a very important set of nested questions that you've asked. And while we in USAID and other donor partners are attacking these on different fronts, I think it's absolutely right that we need to raise up several of the issues that you raised. On the policy front, I think that one thing that we've learned through Feed the Future, and backing up from Feed the Future from the Rome principles that sort of underlie this issue of it's not sustainable unless it's country-led and countries buy into it and countries are very much engaged in the process. That applies 500% for policy reform. So one of the interesting things that came out of the G8 New Alliance discussions and programs last year was a set of very serious discussions with top leaders. Tanzania with President Kikwete, with the leaders of key countries in Africa, basically sitting with them and sort of analyzing, there's a laundry list, of potential policy reforms. What would you think are, the top ones to focus on first for the goal of really accelerating the right kind of private sector investment, the kind of private sector investment that will reach out and lift up smallholders? And so in the New Alliance, in the 6 initial New Alliance countries in Africa, these country leaders themselves have identified a small package of policies, and even more important, a task list, for themselves and for donors and private sector to help with. So in every one of those countries, I believe, input sector reform. So what does it take, to get better at seed release, regulations or improve seed certification laboratories or make it easier for private sector companies to come in. So that's one thing. So just the takeaway there is we can do a lot of analyses. You know, we're not going to get very far unless we're sitting down at a table with countries and working together on a short set, you know, based on evidence, but which they agree is important. The other issue I just wanted to comment on is this, you know, the lost generational knowledge and, you know, the decline of extension and, you know, the tremendous problem I know that we're also familiar with, you know, how much gray literature is locked in our file cabinets and in file cabinets around the world. Another one of the G8 programs that we're working on together with the CG system is what we're calling, euphemistically, a technology platform, you know, which would, at the first blush, at the country level, would become a kind of repository, you know, for standardized information on research and, you know, what's known now about the yields and utilization of different varieties. So we are working with countries themselves in pulling that together. But you see over the long term, you know, the CGIAR also has this problem, you know, being able to share information across its centers. So they have the gray literature problem as well. So it's envisioned as a, you know, a continental, regional, and eventually a global technology platform that would be useful not just for researchers, but also for extension agents and for agribusiness folks, you know, to be able to pull down what's the recommendation, what's the IPM recommendation, or a link, you know, to Coursera material, as Dale has proposed on IPM. So that's our wild ambition that we're starting out with, you know, trying to collect as much possible at the country level in a format that makes it useful for policymakers and not just researchers.
Let me just add a quick comment on that. The data issue is huge, and this issue of gray literature and publication bias and the fact that that gets into the practice and development and implementation is extremely problematic. The U.S. land grants universities, I don't suppose we have any library scientists in here. They're actually very active in developing distributed repository models, exploring workflows for data management, data curation, data preservation, data ownership, all of these issues that are out there. So they are certainly an entity within the land grant system that is at the forefront of trying to figure out what to do, because their mandate is changing as well. They are moving from documents to data. And so if you and National Ag Library in the US is in the process of working with USDA right now to try to figure out how to become the de facto home for all agricultural data. And any project funded through USDA, either through ARS or through AFRI-NIFA. And they want it all. They, quite honestly, they don't know what to do with it. Should they actually have it delivered? But that's what they're working on. So it is a big problem. But there is a lot of activity going on that I think could be useful and helpful.
Sarah, did you have a comment? Well, I think critical, just my own response here is it's important that the entire research community be bound up in that work with the library so that they will know how to use it. You've hit on an absolutely fundamental issue here in terms of the accumulation of knowledge in science. So turn to the board. Other comments or questions you'd like to raise? Gabisa.
Just a quick remark, perhaps to reinforce a comment that was made by Sylvie. There is a growing recognition about sustainable systems approach of farming and the value thereof to begin to put together research programs along those lines. That implicitly suggests that we move the research arena to ecological areas that are pertinent for some of these practices, with the understanding that the extent to which you can extrapolate systems research results over a larger inference space is very limited. And so the closer you bring it to regions and ecological zones, take advantage of the cultures and practices and the crop mix thereof that are there, and the likelihood of narrowing relatively the inference space for that recommendation package. And then Sylvie also suggested the fact that the component parts of some of these systems require a longer term research. There have been dialogue over time now, over the last several years, within the CGIAR systems to put together, or at least to suggest that one of the CRP programs that are focused more on systems move into these ecological areas. The difficulty, I'm only assuming here, the difficulty begins to come from niches funding agencies and programs want to find and to identify programs as they support as being distinct, but still with respect and appreciation of some of these problems. And so how do we move by beginning dialogue among funding agencies to recognize the value of sustainable systems approach to farming and begin to bring it home closer to these ecological areas where these farmings are practiced, such that the end results of the recommendations are ripe enough to be taken up by systems. And so I'm asking particularly you, Julie, whether or not that kind of dialogue within the sphere you operate is taking place, and what mechanisms, what persuasive powers we may have to begin these communities of funders to begin to appreciate the value of investing in a concerted manner where there would be greater value coming out of that. Thank you.
If you'd like to make a brief response, we are going to take a break here in just a moment and then get back to the next panel because these are all highly interactive. Please, go ahead.
Sure, I'll comment, but I also ask Sahara Moon to chime in as well. I think you're right, Gabisa, but really in the way that we've designed our Africa Rising program, the sustainable intensification programs that Sahara Moon talked about, was very much intended to draw in other partners in this space on the ground and expand to the degree possible, to the manageable degree possible, a reflection of ecosystem issues as well as farming system issues. It's been difficult. The design process for Africa Rising in the three areas, done very much, in partnership with the CG centers and with some of the other accompanied by BIFAD, which is very interested in looking at some of the impact and assessment issues that arise. And so they will be, I believe they've committed now to funding that element of the research. We've been also drawing and working closely with Australia, which has been one of the main funders of conservation agriculture. So those discussions, yes, are, so I think, there's both a need for a kind of a political level call, for coordination on this. There also needs to be something from the countries themselves calling for collaboration around this kind of research. There also probably need to think about funding mechanisms, that kick in when there is collaboration. So that's something that's, I think, been usefully explored in a couple of other areas that might be applied here. So we're making some steps in this area, but certainly agree with you that we have far to go. Sahara Moon?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just very briefly, you mentioned the CRPs and how can they have more of a systems focus. I guess talking about successes, one of the areas where I think Africa Rising has been successful is I understand recently that the Human Tropic Systems CRP of the CGIAR is going to be adopting the same sort of research framework that Africa Rising is using and taking that across their system. So I think that's the kind of sort of approach we're looking for, so that USAID's investments, the CGIAR investments,
future U.S. university investments will be sort of adopting similar research frameworks as they move into systems, so that we do have that really comprehensive approach across the systems.
It's a challenging discussion we've had here with regard to, I think, BIFAD's role and USAID in the universities. We're into really the limitation of resources that we're facing here, and we're going to have to think very strategically. And you've helped us get started very much. It's been a great panel. We're going to take a 10-minute break at this point, and I urge everyone to be back in your seats at 10:45, and we'll be right on schedule to complete the engage with the next panel. So let's give this group another round of applause. Well deserved.